Luana, Herek. I'm Gestalt-Therapist in Curitiba, Brazil, and I'm feeling honored because today I'm going to interview one of the most important Gestalt-therapists of all times. He contributed a lot to the development of the Gestalt therapy, and today I'll talk to Dr. Erving Polster. He is director of the Gestalt Training Center San Diego, where people have come to train with him from all over the world. He is also clinical professor at University of California, San Diego, and through his writings, lectures, and demonstrations, he has contributed recently to a swelling social application to the therapeutic ethos. This expansion is leading to a narrow enlightenment about the mind. He has currently authored Beyond Therapy, a new book, with an expected August publication date. Hi, Erv. How are you doing?
Hi, Luana.
It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Well, I'm so glad to be with you and to have some way of communicating with the people who will be at your conference in Brazil.
Nice. So, I would like to start with talking about your new book that's going to be published, Beyond Therapy, that refers to your work with Life Focus Community Group. And I would like to know more about how you what way you approach to these ideas for this work.
Yeah, well, of course, that's a very large question. I'll try to be as brief as I can in answering it. But it's basically based on what I think of as a key premise about psychotherapy principles that has been quite overlooked over the years. When Freud came on to try to cure people of their psychological troubles, he hit upon psychotherapy as a means to do it, and what psychotherapy involved was paying attention to the life you lived. And he had all kinds of ways of inspiring attention to the way people live their lives, and that led them to unfold their lives, appreciate their lives, recognize their lives, and have some way of moving forward from the lives they have lived. Now, that was an instrument for cure, presumably. The psychotherapy that resulted from that has been very important over the last, what is it 100 years or more than 100 years? More than 100 years. Now, what was overlooked was that the instrument of paying attention to your life, that was the instrument, was actually more interesting than the goal, which was a cure. So whereas curing people was very important, and rightfully so, it overlooked the fact that there was something generic in human beings that called for them to pay attention to the lives they're living. And not only did it call for them to do that, but it's built into the personal system so that just as with other basic functions like sex and eating and moving, we do it generically, we also pay attention to our lives generically. But somehow we overlook that as a fundamental function. And we have to recognize that psychotherapy offered that option for people at large, quite apart from whether they needed to change their lives. So the concept of changing the paradigm from changing people's lives to accentuating people's lives, to recognizing people's lives, to appreciating people's lives, to exploring people's lives, to understanding people's lives, those functions remain as crucial irrespective of whether one wants to change or not. Now it happens that change is so integrally related to function that change will happen, but we don't move because because we're supposed to get somewhere. We move because it's in our nature to move, but we do get somewhere.
We don't need to look for the change. It's going to happen if you pay attention.
I'm moving my hands now because I want to. It's not because I want to show you something. It's because I just want to move my hands. Sex is not to. It serves the purpose of reproducing the population, but that's not why we have sex. We have sex because it's built in us to have sex, and it reproduces the population. So we have to find some way of recognizing that there's a fundamental of paying attention to the lives we live that is valuable for people at large, irrespective of whether they need therapy or not. And religion has done that. But somehow or another we have detached ourselves from that ongoing function and from an association with the way that we may guide and orient people every day. So that's a basic premise of the book, but there's a lot that goes into that.
I can't wait to read this book.
I hope from your mouth into God's ears, or vice versa.
Okay. You said to me another day that you worked with large groups in coffee shops many years ago, and I became very curious about it. Could you speak about this experience?
She said that a while ago.
You want that?
Oh, yes.
I'm interested in know a little bit more about this experience.
Yes. Well, in a book that, in an early book that Miriam and I, the first book that we wrote that psychotherapy is too good to be limited to the sick. So I had the feeling like I wanted to do something that had therapeutic basis, but that wasn't a part of the psychotherapy practice. So I happened to have a relationship with a Unitarian minister, and I asked him, is there something I can do in your church? He says, well, we have a coffee house. Come on down and talk to the people at the tables. And I did that. And I did that for a few nights, and very interesting to sit around a table and talk to the people in the coffee house about the lives they were living. But then they moved into a larger place. The church moved the coffee house into a larger place. So I went with it, and there was a stage there, and there would be large groups of people, 125, 150 people, and we would do sessions there, which we called encounter session. And we did various things. In those days, this was in the 1960s, hippies was a common term. So we did hippies and policemen, hippies and parents, various things that were interesting to the young people who came to the coffee house. And that went on for quite a while. And then there was a fire and the place burned down. And so that ended. And I moved from Cleveland not too long after that. I never did it again after moving to San Diego because I went into a different direction. But now I've come back to that, not now, but in recent years.
Yay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I would like to know what people bring to this conversation in that time, because a long time ago the world was really different. So what kind of talk? Do you remember some?
Well, okay, now you have to remember that this was 55 years ago. Okay?
Like yesterday.
So, I remember, there's one thing I remember. We had a role playing between a hippie and a policeman. So one person from the audience came up and was the hippie, and another person from the audience came up and he played the role of the policeman. And they were talking to each other. And the policeman said something that you might not have expected him to say to the hippie. And the hippie responded as though he hadn't said it. And I said to the hippie, "Did you hear what he just said?" He said, "Yes, but I don't want to hear it." I'm angry at him, and that's the way I'm going to keep it. And it was a commentary on how people get stuck in their emotions because of some principle and then disregard the things that happen that might change their attitude. So that was one example of something that happened there, but I don't remember much else.
No, it's a good example. It's funny. Nice. So, in the first chapter of your book, you wrote about
another thing that came out of that was we did start large group formations at the Gestalt Institute in Cleveland. I started to explore the large group phenomenon. And we had meetings there for many, many years. I led it only in the beginning, and someone else took it over later on. But it went on for many years where people would meet periodically as a large group and discuss and have some kind of thematic perspective and deal with some kind of theme of their lives. I don't remember what the themes were anymore, but that went on for many years, coming out of the coffee house thing. And then I don't know what else happened there. Okay, let's go further.
Okay. You in the first chapter of your new book, you wrote about the speed of life, and it's a really big topic. So could you speak a little bit more? How do you think this speed affects our lives in this changing world nowadays?
Well, the speed of life that I'm talking about is permanent. It's not just nowadays. It's true that life has speeded up nowadays, but I'm not referring to that kind of speed. What I'm referring to is that there's more than 86,000 seconds every day. And in every second, something is happening. And the human mind has to absorb all of those happenings. We don't even know what we're doing. It's so big that it happens automatically. But it's more than anybody can manage. Nobody is up to managing the speed of life. So what happens is that a lot of what we draw into ourselves is lost. It's not lost. It moves into the background of our minds, and much of that, you could call it storyline, remains in an accessibly hidden region of the mind. And what I am proposing is that we are not trying to get into the deep unconscious when we explore human experience, as much as getting into that accessibly hidden region of the mind. And in these life-focused community groups, we set up conditions and themes which will ignite people into telling the stories that remain fallow, hidden in the background, but readily accessible, only waiting for the inspiration to come out. And it's in that sense that I refer to the speed of life, that we have to have some way of catching up with what we leave behind. And the life-focused community groups are an instrument for catch-up for the story of our lives. And it's something which is widely welcome in the human experience. And in my book, I show how many ways there are that people use for catching up with what's missing in their speedy incorporation of the events that face them.
Yeah.
Get what I mean?
I remember your group in Puebla when you you played the song "We Are Not Alone."
Oh, you were in that group. Oh, okay. And you get that. Okay, well, that song, "You Are Not Alone," sung by a beautiful singer, ignites the mind to tell about what there is in your heart that responds to the theme "You are not alone." And that, of course, is different for everybody.
Yeah, it's different, and at the same time, there is a resonance between the group. It's really nice. It was a wonderful experience. I really enjoyed that experience.
It was what?
It was a wonderful experience.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yes. And so the idea of the life-focused community groups is that we take a large group of people. It doesn't have to be large, but it can be large. And we take themes which everybody has to live with because they're human themes. So you have a common purpose, and we find a way to give it individual expression. So you combine the commonality and the individuality, and people come together and have what I have usually experienced as a very compelling, absorbing experience that gives them some recognition, some affirmation, some inspiration, some sense of the vitality of the lives they're living.
Okay, nice. I'm enjoying a lot this conversation.
What's that? Okay, all right.
So,
Okay.
You wrote about the pathways of connectedness. You wrote about person to person, moment to moment, event to event, one part of the person to another part. But I would like to know more about the dimension, person to person, in therapeutic process. Could you talk about this?
Yes. Person to person is probably the more obvious of the 4 points of connection, but they're all important. But person to person is a fundamental of appreciation of personhood. And in addressing another person, it's easy to become technological and leave behind the personal interaction as being less important as the technology of, for example, setting up an experiment or making an interpretation or an explanation, if you want to use Gestalt terms. But basically, there's something inherently it's something fundamental about the relation of person to person. It starts with the concept of contact. Now, the fundamental idea of the contact boundary is that there's a point at which each person meets that which is not himself or herself. At that point, where one meets another, we are indivisible. If you take the boundary between a property line, the property of your house and the house next to you, or a building, or a city, or wherever the boundary is, the boundary belongs to both. But it's an infinite differentiation so that one knows which side is which. With human beings, that relational indivisibility that comes at the contact boundary is a very inspiring source of engagement, because we all recognize that we are of the same makeup in some fundamental ways, and we are made to integrate with each other. So there's something fundamental in the human engagement. I don't think there's anything new in what I'm saying, that human beings care about human beings. Now, it's easy to set that caring apart from some activity and to become technical and technological. It's very tempting to do, and it's very difficult sometimes to be a human being with purposes that don't that don't coordinate well with that relationship. So, for example, if I'm doing therapy with you, I experience you as the only otherness that exists in the world for a moment. And if I can get that feeling across, that you matter to me, and you matter to me in a way that transcends ordinary mattering in everyday life, you will be inspired to connect with me. And you will be willing to take the trip that the two of us take together. If I keep myself apart, I still have that relational indivisibility, but it's dimmed. It's not as strong.
About the dimension of person to person, the importance of this in the therapeutic session.
Yes, and I think I spoke about the absorption on the part of the therapist of being involved, and I don't think I could, I don't remember how I said it or what I said, but basically I want to say also about that that people generally have done some operations within their own mind that reduce their presence or that distort their presence, giving one presence rather than another which may also be a part of them, but which is not so evident. Now, the therapist has to find a way of seeing that person as they are, irrespective of the way they may interfere with the therapist seeing them as they are. So it's a little like the novelist, in a way, sees life beyond what we ordinarily see. He has some way of magnifying, some way of embellishing, some way of reinterpreting, some way of setting up a context, some way of establishing a new way of looking at it. And the therapist has that requirement in working with the people that they work with. But a stepping stone to that is for the patient to experience a therapist as invested in them in terms of their attention. That everything that happens is just about them. And I can remember the experience I had in my own therapy as a graduate student. This was in the 1940s, where I went into the therapy, and for the first time in my life, somebody listened to me for session after session after session. I never knew anybody would care to hear that much about me, and he did, and I knew he was listening because the things he said were right on. They tapped into my sense for his understanding of me and for his carrying what I'm saying a step further. So that quality of personhood is very important in the therapy.
Yeah.
There's so much to say about it, but those are introductory words.
Yeah, and this I remember of your book, the every person's life, every person's life worth a novel. Yes. That's exactly what you are talking about. And you write in this book how important it is to people to tell their stories, right? To rein the elusiveness of experience, to join lives, to learn lessons, to discharge energy. And could you expand a little bit these thoughts?
Well, it's very important particularly at that time, where Gestalt-Therapy had a sense of the avoidance function of what was called aboutism. Fritz Perls could not stand aboutism. But life is about things that happen. You can't discard aboutism and still have a life. And aboutism is the source of stories. Stories are about things that have happened. And they are the markers of a lifetime. So we need to have markers of a lifetime to know that we've lived, to have a feeling for the thrust and the flow of where we've been and where we're going. So the telling of stories is very important because they tell us where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and they reproduce events which happen only in a moment. So there are events which are experiences of the moment which bear service as markers of a lifetime rather than just momentary experiences. They refresh us, they affirm us, they appreciate us, they define us, and they tell us what's going on. Everybody wants to know what's going on. That's how life goes. We want to know what's going on, and stories are an instrument for doing that.
Okay. And since the beginning of Gestalt therapy, what do you think has changed in Gestalt therapy? Do you think that Gestalt approach is in dialogue with knowledge of other areas, other approaches?
Well, you know, I've been retired from my working as a therapist for over 15 years. So I'm not exactly up to date on what is happening in Gestalt therapy. But my sense is that we are reaching beyond the shibboleths, the symbols that Fritz Perls established that were very narrow and that isolated Gestalt therapy from the rest of the psychotherapeutic community. And Perls, of course, always had this sense that Gestalt therapy, for example, was totally different from psychoanalysis. He never wanted to have any sense of association with psychoanalysis. But psychoanalysis was the parent of Gestalt therapy. We can't exclude having parents. We might ignore them, but we can't exclude them. And we can't exclude having neighbors. There are people who live with us, and they have ideas too. And I think in the beginning, Gestalt therapy tended to be a rather demarcated experience rather than just part of a larger scene. Not that that was always the case, but it was the image that was gotten across by Perls and some of the others who followed him most closely. I don't think that is happening anymore. There may be some of it still going on, but I'm not one to know the details of whether we've expanded to relate ourselves to what's happening along other spheres of development. There are many Gestalt therapists who are interested in, I've forgotten the name, point out, my memory is leaving me for the moment, but I know that Gestalt therapists have crossed over into other areas. Lynn Jacobs, for example, has crossed over with psychoanalysis, and without aborting Gestalt therapy, without distorting Gestalt therapy, and seeing the interconnections between them. And I think that's a very productive direction to go.
Okay. And how do you think that, how do you see the dialogue between Gestalt therapy and art and aesthetics?
Well, art is basically a magnifying glass for human experience. And that's what therapy is also, whether it's Gestalt therapy or any therapy. What we tend to do is to accentuate experiences which might otherwise go right past our attention. And we give it additional scope and dimension and content. And so we heighten the experience of what goes on in life. that's what art does. It heightens experience. And so if you have somebody like Salinger writing about, in his Catcher in the Rye, writing about the inauthenticity of ordinary communication in our society, whereas we might be living with that, when he writes about it, it makes it a stronger, more recognizable phenomenon. And so we are cousins to art, brothers or sisters perhaps even, in that process of accentuating life and putting it into a more visible and more humanly entertaining and felt experience.
Yeah, you wrote about the three things that can make people connected. Like art is one of them, right?
Say again?
Things that have make people to connect, and art is one of them.
Oh, art is it accentuates life experience. It may accentuate either connection or disconnection. It not only accentuates connection, it also accentuates disconnection. It shows us the ways in which we are disconnected from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Art is a window into the way we live our lives, and it's a window into the way our minds work. Essentially, it's doing what psychotherapy does, except that art has no intention to solve specific life problems. It simply portrays them, whereas psychotherapy intends to change life, tends to solve problems. But if we see the convergence of the two, then we see a larger application of psychotherapy than just the curative function. And I hope that will catch on, as I said earlier in our conversation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, could you send a message to all Gestalt therapists that gonna attend the conference in May?
Could you send a message
Say
to
again?
everyone?
A message to all the Gestalt therapists that are gonna attend the conference in May, on May.
Hallelujah.
Okay. I really appreciate our conversation. Thanks a lot for your time, for you be here with us today, and you provide us with a deep overview of your thoughts and ideas, and I really appreciate that. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. See you.
Bye-bye.
I'll be
Bye-bye.
in touch. Bye.
Bye-bye.